Right. Welcome everyone. Nick Wagner Sr. It's Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern time, so we have another amazing guest here on the Full Potential podcast, and I really think that Ingrid is not going to disappoint tonight because she has had a fantastic and super interesting career, and I think many of you will find it fascinating. So Ingrid Goldbloom Bloch, thank you for joining tonight. I'm so happy to have you here. I know we've spoken before, and we talked about you coming on the show a few months ago, and here we are. And it's November 15th. So
Crazy.
welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me.
And Ingrid, we're gonna dive into your entire career journey, and you do a lot of fun things. But I want to start with what is the beautiful piece of artwork behind you, which we're going to talk about your art tonight. But I just want to ask, what is that really cool piece of artwork behind you?
Thanks for asking. It's actually one of my mixed media sculptures. So I take recycled and upcycled materials and put them together in new and surprising ways, which is exactly what I do with the people I work with in my career coaching. So we'll talk about the parallels. And this is a wall quilt made out of radiator covers, CDs, and a lot of hardware finds. So it's gracing the walls of one of my walls in my office.
I love it. I love it. It's definitely unique, and I can tell you that no one else probably has anything like that on their wall in their office. So I love it. So let's jump in, right? So people always ask, why do I interview people about their career journeys? And you are someone, and as everyone will see as we talk about your career, who loves helping people with their careers. And I'm the same way, right? I'm passionate about helping others. The Full Potential movement and this podcast is part of my family's nonprofit, and it's my way of giving back. And I think I've had a lot of mentors and individuals in my career that have shared career stories with me that have, I think, helped me in my career. And I thought 2.5 years ago, I should start showcasing people's careers because people can learn a lot from everyone's career journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I do this, right? And every week we have some awesome guest on from the corporate world or the nonprofit world or education or startups, whatever. Name the background, and we talk about their career journey. So we're going to go through yours tonight. I want to go all the way back to the beginnings. I always like to start where it all begins. When you're a little Ingrid, what was your dream as a little kid that you wanted to do when you grew up? Like what did you want to do?
It's funny because this is how I start doing a self-assessment with somebody, is going back to those early inklings, and there's often a thread. So my career dreams were to be a fairy godmother, because when you're 5, you're not realistic about that magic doesn't exist. But I feel in a way that
it's unfortunate it doesn't.
Yeah, but it can. So I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a teacher. And then as I got a little older, I was convinced I was going to be a pediatrician because I love kids and I love helping. And I'm jumping ahead, Nick, but it's funny because I feel like my work as a career counselor and coach, I've helped over 2,500 people transform their life in some way. And I feel like it's that magic being a little tiny bit of a fairy godmother helping make the magic happen for people. So I get to do the training and stand up, a lot of keynote speeches or corporate training is the actress in me getting to be on stage. And while I didn't end up being a pediatrician, I do help people go from some part of maybe unwell to optimal health in their career. So it's an interesting thread, but it took a lot of career probing to realize that it's actually something that I'm doing now.
So you always had an idea that you wanted to help people. You just didn't really know how.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, and we'll talk about that because I actually think, and there's a lot of research out there that obviously how you feel about your career is tied very, very directly to how you feel personally as well. Because
Absolutely.
So many of us, I think, really believe that who we are as a person is our career, which I think you and I would probably hope that people would separate those, but a lot of people do tie their kind of like
Right.
their worth to their job, right? So I think you bring up a great point. How you've probably helped some people in some dark places get out of that and find their role. When you went to college, you went to college for University of Wisconsin for psychology and communication. Did you know at that point what you wanted to do with that degree, and was the expectation from you growing up that Ingrid was going to college, or was that something that you and your family talked about?
Such a good question, Nick, because so first of all, going to college was just a given in my family, and I realized that that's a huge privilege. So
Well,
not
it's
only
so different for every family. I mean,
right,
it just based
right,
off of how you grow up.
and there's a lot that I took for granted growing up, which was I had my father was a doctor, so I actually grew up with privilege, and I grew up in Wisconsin, and you could go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for really cheap for
Yeah.
in-state tuition. For your listeners that are young, I hate to tell you how much it was because you will cry. Um, but when I started, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And the good news is I did not get a lot of pressure. I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician until my first semester of chemistry, and that sort of killed my medical career freshman year. And then I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a child psychologist. My dad was a psychiatrist, and it's interesting how one person can either promote you and help you, or one simple comment from somebody you really value can change your trajectory. And my dad made a comment that psychologists didn't get enough respect. And now the world has changed dramatically. Um, and so I decided to go into something with communication arts, not as a broadcaster, but I really loved interpersonal communication. I did research with a professor on nonverbal communication and how similar and dissimilar pairs sort of start mirroring each other, which, surprisingly, many, many years later is how I teach people how to be great interviewers. So I knew something with communication, but I sort of stumbled along. I didn't really declare my double major till junior year. I never thought about really how I was going to make my money. And senior year of college, I walked into the Career Center and said, okay, how do I get a job? And maybe there's some people on right now that are doing that. And the people that were interviewing were retail or sales. And I thought, okay, well, I'll get a job in retail because that means I get to leave snowy Wisconsin. And I got a job with the May company in LA. So I got to move to, so my whole job at the time was I want to get out of the snow and move to LA, and because my boyfriend's going to be there. I had no interest in clothes, in retail, in shopping, but I just did it because I was always good at what was sort of in front of me. And I worked there. I worked my way up into the buying office. I was going to New York City on buying trips. I got recruited to go work for a clothing manufacturer in sales. And all along, it was not me. It just was, seemed like what I should do. And it seemed cool, right? People said, oh, you get to go on these buying trips.
Right.
And but I always looked around at what other people were doing where they seemed happier. And I was always willing to talk to people about their jobs, like you're doing. What do you like about your job? What don't you like about it? How did you get into it? Was it what you expected? If somebody was interested in moving into that field, how might they go about it? So it wasn't, do you have any job openings? It was just truly curiosity. And from there, I realized that I wanted to get into advertising and marketing. I'm giving you my whole career and you haven't even asked me. And I jumped into advertising and marketing in New York City.
I want to pause you for 1 second,
Yeah.
though, because I think your experience, Ingrid, I don't think is uncommon for many students that are in college and early career graduates. I think many students go into college not knowing exactly what they want to do. I think many people change their majors. I mean, I changed my major. You changed your major. It sounds like, and I think a lot of students graduate still not knowing what they want to do. So I don't think you taking a job that necessarily wasn't you as your first job out of school is necessarily a good or a bad thing. I think for a lot of students, it's, well, I went to school. I need a job.
Right.
I need to prove to myself, my parents, whomever, that this was worth it. And a lot of people take a job even if they don't necessarily like it. So what made you make that switch to the advertising and the marketing? Like what drove you that way?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, which is not only not knowing your major, but most people change careers multiple times. I've had
Absolutely.
5 different careers, and giving myself permission that to not know, right? To not know. So, what moved, still being very young, friends were in advertising and marketing, and they had fun. They were doing on baseball teams, and it was all about the lifestyle. I had no idea really what went on in advertising and marketing, especially at a big firm, but I was able to get the job because I had retail experience. And so I realized that oftentimes something that doesn't connect at the time, or something you don't even want to do at the time, right? I said, I don't love shopping. But that retail experience has opened doors for me. And it got me into advertising and marketing. And then I left Saatchi & Saatchi a few years after and moved to San Francisco, got a job in marketing. And my first marketing job was at the May Company department stores where I started. So a lot of things sometimes will come full circle. So how did I get into it? It just seemed interesting and fun. But once I got into it, I started paying attention to what I was good at and what I wasn't. And I realized that no matter where I was working, what I was good at was the people relationships. I was always good at advocating for myself, advocating for other people, making sort of functional work teams. And it was about the people, not the work. And I hit my early 30s, and there's always usually a reason that somebody takes a look at themselves. And in my early 30s, I'm remarried, but I had a short marriage. It ended. My life wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And suddenly I had this wake up call of, I got to have my midlife crisis early, but all my friends around me, all my peers were having their first babies. They were sort of set in their career. And suddenly everything I knew fell apart. And I went back to New York City, and I remember going back to Saatchi & Saatchi advertising and thinking, well, I'll just resume my life. And I realized I'm not that person anymore, but I don't know who I am. So when I was 31, I went to a career counselor in San Francisco, and I went through the career counseling coaching process.
Oh,
And
wow.
just like your first question, what were my early career thoughts? I went back to that and did a true self-assessment of the skills I have, but not just the skills I have, the skills I enjoy using.
Right.
Because your point is, people sometimes do things by necessity, but you don't enjoy it. My interests, my values, my personality, and where those fit together sort of pointed me in this direction for the last 20 years. I didn't want to become a therapist because I like telling people what to do and talking about myself. No, I like seeing instant change and really helping people, that regardless if you have therapy issues, regardless of the stories we tell ourselves, there's a way to enhance your career and life.
So what did you learn when you went into this career coach? Like what was so eye-opening about this experience?
Really interesting. What was eye-opening was taking that time to look within and do a self-assessment. So rather than following along what we're taught, right? We say to little kids, I know you have kids, Nick, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what's your major? Or where are you getting a job? And it's all very externally focused versus saying, what are the jobs or places that would be good for somebody like me if these are my values, if these are my interests, if this is my personality and how I like to work, right? So some people love to wait till the last minute, and they love that sort of fast, innovative, never know what's coming down. And other people, I work for a CPA accounting firm, it's very planned. So if I could, what are the jobs that are out there that fit my personality, my skills, my interest, and my values? So when working with that career person, I spent time looking at each of those components and then saying, well, what are the jobs that best mirror where all my things intersect? And there's actually a process you can go through of self-assessment and then research and self-discovery, and there is no one perfect job. In the last few years, I've been doing a lot around design thinking and using design thinking principles. And there's this theory or this thought that, you're supposed to know your passion, or we're supposed to be, most people never do. There's just good jobs out there, or there's good versions of you or great versions of you. And maybe you won't be all your versions at once. So the long-winded answer is I realized that I could sequence my career, that I didn't have to just do one thing for the next 20 years, that if I stayed open to new possibilities, I could always be growing. And it was the beginning of not defining myself just by my job title, but really looking at who am I and then what fits that. So it's sort of that bottom-up approach versus what most people do, and especially with COVID, is getting online and just looking online and trying to imagine yourself in there or making up stories. Well, there's no jobs out there, versus I wonder what's out there for somebody like me, and finding, starting to find people doing that and having conversations.
No, it's really interesting. And it's an interesting way to go about kind of doing that self-assessment, like you said. And I think, I wish more people did that self-assessment earlier on in their career, or even when they were in school, because I think that would actually help a lot of people try to figure that out. And I know there are some tools that they use for students in school, but I think, to your point, there's a lot of pressures from a lot of people when you're younger on like what you're going to do after school, right? And like, okay, you're going to graduate from high school. What's next, right? What are you going to do?
Where are you going to go? Right.
Are you going to go to college? Are you not going to go to college? And then if you go to college, okay, now where are you going to work? And I think I always say this to people that I talk with. I think one of the most important things that you can do is, if you're going to go work for someone that you respect what the company does, right? If you don't respect what your company does or their values, that's going to be a real, it's a big disconnect between you and the company, and you're not going to want to go to work every day. So I think that's, you bring up some great points. So you went through this process, and after you kind of had this, this self-assessment with the career coach, what did you do? What did you do from a career perspective? Did you make a big change?
I did. So I narrowed it down to teaching and elementary school teaching, corporate training, therapy, and career coaching, internal sort of career development. And I actually went out and interviewed people doing these jobs. I job shadowed. I sort of tried them on, right,
That's fantastic.
Design. And I'm a big fan of Designing Your Life. There's a book by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, and a workbook. And back to your point, Nick, they teach Designing Your Life at Stanford to students. And it is curriculum on, most people don't know. And it's that you're never going to just think it up and then arrive. You have to test things and see what you like and don't like, and have experiences, and it iterates. So after sitting in and doing my research, I realized I wanted to go back to school and get my master's in counseling psychology. But as I joked earlier, I didn't want to be a therapist. I like the immediacy of, it doesn't matter what your family dynamic was. Let's look at what you want to create in the world, what's going to make you happy, and how to look at the patterns and possibilities, which ties into my art, which is being able to see sort of these disparate parts and how do they fit together into a whole. So hence my business name, Mosaic Careers. Right, we're not cookie cutter. And I got my master's in counseling psychology with a specialty in career development. And I had moved to Boston and from San Francisco. And in California, a lot of the companies had internal career centers, very forward thinking, with the belief that if you could align your employees to what they do best, they're going to be happy and engaged and productive. And therefore, if you're in one department and you maybe should move to another department, we'll help you get there. And if it's not the right fit, we'll help you leave, because you'll be a future brand ambassador for the company. And people shouldn't stick around if they're really
Right.
not happy. They're not going to be productive. And when I moved to Boston 20 years ago, these jobs really didn't exist. And in the last, I'd say, for me, when I started looking to go full time, I have to get 2 kids through college. And back to your point, sometimes you take a job because it's your life's work. Sometimes it serves a purpose. Sometimes it's a piece of maybe a portfolio career. So I thought, I have to get 2 kids through college. I in addition to my independent career work, I think I need sort of that anchor gig. And all of a sudden I started seeing companies where they were adding new roles to have my role, which is the internal career person. So I'm director of talent advancement at a CPA and accounting firm, and my whole sort of marching orders are happy employees will be engaged employees. So I do full potential coaching with the employees. It's called full potential coaching. What do you need to do your best work? So similar to my career assessment, I work with them on how do you need to be managed, what will allow you, which skills do you get to use that you enjoy, how can I help you get there, and how can I help you advocate for yourself. And I also do a lot of communication skills training across the firm so people can become more self-aware and other-aware, because back to your point with sort of corporate America, it's not cookie cutter anymore. People have multiple jobs, multiple choices. And at my company, there's 5 generations working side by side. So
Wow.
What brought somebody into the accounting profession who's working here that's in their 80s is very different than somebody getting out now. What's going to keep somebody engaged and happy? So I'm all about helping people look creatively at their jobs and not listen to those tapes that we often have in our head that limits us. And right now there's a lot of tapes that people have about COVID, and there's a lot of fear. And when you have fear and tapes, it's very constricting, and it holds people back from even moving forward to get that information about what it would be like to work somewhere else. Or
Yeah, and you bring up, so I wanted to hit on a couple things, because before you decided to go back to school to get your master's so you could do this career counseling and coaching, I love how you actually interviewed people in these different jobs and job shadowed, because it's almost, I mean, to your point, right? I mean, learning about jobs and trying jobs before you do them is such a great way to figure out, do you like it? Which is why internships work so well.
right.
But it's hard to do an internship if you're not usually in school. So you kind of went similar idea and just did your own research by doing the interviews and the job shadows, which I love. What so you made a big career pivot, right?
I did.
To just pause your entire career and everything you knew that was going well, and then go back to school to kind of start over. What, for people out there that are listening to this and wondering, how do I do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
What are some of your advice as far as, some of the things you considered, like who you spoke to, like,
Yeah.
just give us some ideas on if you wanted to make a career pivot of that size, where you're either like changing industries without going back to school or changing industries with going back to school. What's some of your advice for people?
That's a great question. So don't do what I did and have a total meltdown in your life, and so you're sort of forced to do it. So oftentimes it's just like you said, you test the waters. So one of the easiest things to do is sign up for a class. So if you're interested in getting into data analytics, take a class. If you've already taken classes and you're still working and you're not ready to quit your job and start new, see if you could do a project for somebody. By doing a project, whether it's paid or unpaid, you're building your resume towards where you're going, not for where you've been. You're also building your network by meeting new people. You're proving your ability to do the job, and you're building out your resume. So that will help you. So definitely informational interviews. If you could do a job shadow for a few days, ask to do a project and start taking some classes or even just one class. The other is getting involved in the community of 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 the people of where you want to be. So on LinkedIn, be in LinkedIn groups. Maybe at first you're just reading and listening to what they're talking about. Once you get a little braver, you might comment. Every time you comment in LinkedIn, everybody gets to meet you. And then eventually, maybe you'll pose a question or share an article. So even though we're not necessarily networking live, professional development groups, networking groups are the best way to, one, meet more people, learn about your profession in a non-pressured way because you're not job hunting, and 80% of jobs are never advertised. And I've always learned about my jobs through my networking
I didn't realize
groups.
it was that high.
It depends what profession you're in. If you're in something with very high turnover and it's hard to find bodies, it will be advertised. If it's, some places are legally required to advertise. So let's say it's a college job, they might have an internal candidate that you have to advertise. If it's certain science jobs or computer programming, but you know, nobody needs to advertise for a special events person at the San Francisco Opera, which is one of my jobs that I had when I was transitioning. By talking to people, you learn about it. And so simply asking, if I was interested in making a career pivot into machine learning, what advice do you have? So the other thing is looking at alumni, if you've gone to college, that are in the profession that you're interested in, posing questions on LinkedIn, Facebook, talking to people. And I will say that this is a great time if you're an introvert, because you don't have to go to this FaceTime. You could do it online. You can start conversations one-on-one in your pajamas. It's much safer and calmer. I will share at the end, Nick, you could talk about it, but I have some resources to share with you as listeners on job search strategies during these uncommon times. And I've pulled together a bunch of resources of how to reach out to people on LinkedIn, how to network, how to get started in a career search or career pivot.
Yeah, and we're absolutely going to share those. And I appreciate that. And you mentioned that COVID is, I think COVID is definitely easier for introverts than extroverts, because extroverts like me are definitely struggling.
Yeah, it's hard.
Not being able to go anywhere or do much. I will tell you that. But no, I think those are some great tips. And I asked that because I think a lot of people want to do a pivot in their career, but they're afraid for a variety of reasons. And I think career pivots are more common now than say 20, 30 years ago, because
Absolutely.
And this is by no means disrespect to generations that are older than me. I'm Gen X, but I think when you look at the generations that, you know, the baby boomer generation and the traditionalists, they just didn't change careers as often, right? A lot of people in those generations would go to a company and they would retire at that company from when they started. And that's just not happening as much anymore for a variety of reasons. So I think the whole idea of this career pivot that you talk about, I think it's just really impactful for people. And I think a lot of people are looking at COVID as maybe now is the time to do a career pivot, because either they were forced to, or they just think, you know what, now is a good time to try something else. So I think that's great advice. You mentioned, you know, you went to school to do this career counseling, and you've done it on your own, right? So you've had your own independent career counseling business for around 20 years, and you've done it for other organizations. You mentioned, the CPA firm you're at today. When you work with individuals in your own business, right? So you're an entrepreneur yourself, and when you work with people, are these people? So you mentioned earlier, are these people coming to you in crisis? Are these people coming to you proactively? You know, what's kind of like the makeup of that? And I asked that because I always try to tell people that you want to try to be in control of your career is the hope, right? So if you want to make a move, you get to decide you make the move, versus your employers told you, hey, Ingrid, unfortunately we don't need you anymore, and then you're forced to make a move. So how does that look when people come to ask you for help?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's yes and yes, it's everything. So when I was working for myself, I also worked for an outplacement company. So companies would lay people off and they would buy outplacement package. So some people I would see through the company. Sometimes people have outplacement and would come to me when they were laid off. But I
So
would say,
can you explain, Ingrid, for my audience that there's maybe hopefully never experienced that? What does that mean? So someone gets laid off, and then an
so
employer will hire a company to help these individuals who they're letting go.
yeah, so not everybody, but good companies will, because you feel some obligation to the people, or it's good branding, or there's a lot of layoffs. So in Boston, I did a lot with State Street because there was a year they laid off 400 people. But if I look at over the years, I mentioned I've coached hundreds of people. 50% of the people that come to me, there's some kind of work dysfunction. So either they're working with a toxic boss or in a toxic environment and they're questioning, is something wrong with me, or did I go into the wrong profession?
That's interesting.
Then there's those people that know what they want to do, they just can't get there. So I've been looking for a job, and so I'm helping with just the best practices in job search. And then there's that other section, that other quarter that's, I want to do something else, but I either don't know what it is, right? I know I'm not happy. What else could I do? Or I have these inklings, but I'm terrified to do it. It's too much. And so that's why I really there's two concepts that I've been teaching. I gave a podcast last week on creating a portfolio career. So you don't necessarily have to have just one income stream. So even though I work full time, I have a portfolio career. I give webinars for different colleges for money. I have a few private clients, and now I have my full-time job. If I was to lose this job, I would take on more clients or sell more art. And so there's a way of sort of spreading the risk. The other is that when it seems so overwhelming to think of a career pivot, and the stories, as soon as somebody thinks about a career change, there's stories. I'm too old, nobody's hiring, I should have gone to college. Whatever those thought tapes are, it stops you from even taking that immediate next step, which is, how do I know that's true? And what information?
So you see people making excuses immediately,
or they have a narrative that they think is true. So it's not necessarily an excuse, but they think it's the facts. So, I'm too old, or I'm too this. And so I help people break it down into really small micro steps so they can take action, and once you get the momentum going, you can make a change. So it's either toxic work environments or kind of figuring out, what am I supposed to do? And like am I living up to my potential? What is my potential? Am I going to get it met at this job? Do I get it met outside of my job, which is why I do my art also. So
and I want to pivot in a minute to talk about your art, because I want to talk about how you mentioned you have this idea of this portfolio career, but I just wanted to, just finalize one thing with what you just said, that I find it interesting that people already have a narrative in their head, or, a reason why they might not be able to do something. And I love how, and you mentioned that you're not a therapist in the traditional sense where you're maybe helping people with mental health, with mental health issues or problems. But you really are a therapist in the sense that you're helping people break through these barriers, like you mentioned, right? So it's like, well, no, actually you could do that, or no, that's actually not true. And to your point, just kind of like gradually helping people get through it. I think, unfortunately, the problem, Ingrid, is probably a lot of people that need someone like yourself for their career don't ever go to someone like you for their career, is actually kind of what I'm thinking as we have this discussion. Because, you mentioned all the way back to college, there are people, there are career centers at every single almost every single college or university.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot of students don't take advantage of those, and they might not have obviously people with as much experience as you, but they have a lot of great resources at those organizations. A lot of people don't even use those. So it's interesting, like how do we bring awareness to this? That having, you have a doctor for your physical health, you have a therapist for your mental health, and maybe you need, I don't know, we're not going to call you Dr. Ingrid, but
A
like
career coach.
maybe you
Yeah.
need maybe like that's something that most people should have, right? And I think a lot of people don't, unfortunately.
I think you're right. And here's a tip. If you did go to college, most colleges have alumni career services.
Oh, that's
So
a great
even
one.
if
Yeah.
you're 10 years out, 20 years out, you could call and say, as an alumni, what kind of career services am I entitled to? But I think you're right. I think of myself as a career therapist, helping people sort of reframe something in a new way. Or I always think we have these cognitive constraints, these stories that get in our way. And one of my exercises I'm going to share with you that you can download is how to sort of check in on those thought tapes and get yourself started, because we all have stories and assumptions, and but there's also different states have career centers depending on where you live, and so there's a full range of options. You don't have to always hire a private person.
I didn't realize that about the states. That's a good call out.
Mm-hmm.
And so and you mentioned we're going to share some of your resources with my audience. So what we'll do, Ingrid, is we're going to link to your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with you if they want to connect with you, and we'll link to your website as well where people can learn more about your personal career coaching, and then we'll also share some of those resources in some of the posts that we put on LinkedIn with people, because you have some great, I think absolutely great content for people that are, especially now with COVID and so many people looking for jobs. So I want to pivot because we talked a lot about your more of your day jobs, right? So your full-time job, the with CPAs, your career coaching, and we talked about how you got there. But another thing that you do, and we talked about it when we started the show with your art in the background, is you're also an artist. And you mentioned how you sell art and you have different, like a portfolio of jobs. But I want you to talk about how something like art for you, which I think, if I recall, when we first spoke, started out as a hobby and then got more serious as you kind of went along. How something like that's outside of what you do on a day-to-day basis is so important to your career.
You're absolutely right. So it goes back to, I think, identity. So we all have these identities, and especially with jobs and career, some people, that's all you do, or you think about it and you spend your time. And so by having, and I'll tell you the history of this art, because, but by having this, now it's a hobby, but this second career, this opportunity to work with my hands, to work with my mind in a completely different way, I have gotten exposure to people I normally wouldn't. So I have a whole different...
So networking.
Absolutely. Networking, also in terms of problem solving, how I see the world. When I went, so even with my own business, even after I became a career counselor and coach and had been doing it for years, about 5 years ago, I hired my own career coach because I was kind of stuck. And she asked me to look at, how do I make a piece of art and then lay that process against how I coach somebody. And I realized that the same process, when I look at a bunch of raw materials and I say, what could I do with this? What else could this be? Right? Is like looking at somebody and having somebody say, I don't know what I could do. I like this, I like that, but they don't fit together. It doesn't make sense. And then playing with them in different ways, different combinations to then create this art. So it has actually informed my my career counseling, and recently became the thing that set me apart from other career counselors. So what makes me special, what my superpower is this ability to see patterns and possibilities where the average person can't. And that has opened up opportunities to speak about the gig economy, design thinking. People will send people to me because they'll say, Ingrid's really creative. And But the narrative I had about it is I didn't go to art school. I can't draw or paint. I'm not a real artist. Art's too woo-woo of a profession. I'll never make enough money. So I never pursued it. And it
So I
wasn't.
want to pause you. So everything that you were teaching your clients about believing in themselves and not listening to the narrative in their head, you fell into the same trap.
We all do.
Yeah. No,
You
you're
know,
right. No, I know. I mean,
we
therapists
all
have
do. The
therapists,
cobbler's
right? Career
children.
coaches have career coaches.
Right. I say the cobbler's children go barefoot. And I say, I don't have to have my own stuff together to help you facilitate a process for someone else. It's much easier to do it. I didn't with my career, but there's always that one thing, what is that one thing, I'll ask your audience, that you really want to do, but you're a little afraid of, that's exciting and terrifying. And that's that thing that we tell ourselves a story, right? I want to give a TED talk. I want to hike the Appalachian Trail. There's something that pushes that edge that's exciting and scary. And when I was in my early mid 30s, actually, after I'd made my whole career change, I said to a friend, you've always known me as a businesswoman, but deep inside I'm an artist. And she said, everybody knows it but you. And as soon as I said it out loud, I ended up getting into a lot of art shows. I've been flown around internationally. I've shown in museums. I've been in books. And so the story I'm trying to say is that if you claim out loud what it is that you want or that you are, you get exposed to those people. So it is so important to have balance in your life, have a hobby, or use different senses. So even, there's a lot of people baking bread right now with COVID, but it's very meditative. So it helps you have balance. It also makes you more interesting when you're talking to people at networking events, finding commonalities.
It's just such great advice because I think we are, and I don't know if it's a U.S. centric thing, but I think there's other countries too. We're just so career focused, and I think so many times we just define ourselves by what we do instead of who we really are, right? And I think what your point of all of this is, right, and doing all these things and having a full-time job and having your own business and being an artist is you're not just the full-time job. You're multiple things, right? I mean, you're Ingrid, which is this whole culmination of experience, which I love. So I think it's really important because, and there's been a lot of research around this that, individuals that work, 60, 70, 80 hours a week in the same job are actually sometimes not as effective, right? And not as successful as individuals that work less and do things outside of work, right? Or those that take time off, right? There's more research that if you take time off, you're more successful, so and more effective. So it's just a great thing that I wanted to highlight. And I know we'll link to your website with the art too, so people can check it out because you make some very, very unique art. And I think when people think of the word art, right, I think the first thing people usually think of, Ingrid, is painting, right? Because
I can draw a stick figure. I cannot.
But to your point, right? Your art all involves, building things out of I think you said recycled or upcycled materials, which is just so cool. So I just wanted to make sure we hit on that.
Thank you.
So before we get into my last question, which I always close with the same question, which is, what's your advice to help people reach their full potential? I want to just ask a couple quick lightning round questions, if you don't mind. Because I think you have so much good advice to share that I want to ask a couple of these things. Mentors. How many, have you had mentors in your career, and why are they so important?
I have mentors now, and I've had them throughout. They're not always official mentors, but somebody that I've respected, that I've gone to get advice. I've had a lot of female mentors throughout my career. And during COVID, I put together a group of 5 women that I respected. And I said, do you want to mentor each other? We're all isolated. And so we're from all different fields, different parts of the country. And it's been a wonderful sort of sisterhood of professional women. So it is so important to have a mentor that you can trust, that can give you advice, that is somewhere in your profession, that you respect, that you want to go to. I highly, highly recommend having a mentor. And many of us, it's sort of similar to when you say, who do you respect? And somebody might say, well, I always like talking to my grandfather. He always gave good advice. There's somebody at work that stands out for you, and ask them if you could do a coffee Zoom and pick their brain about some things. And, would they be willing to meet with you more formally? It doesn't have to be a formal mentor program, but it could be that you meet monthly for a cup of coffee and pick their brain. And a lot of people won't do it because they say, I don't want to bother somebody. I don't want to, why would they do it? It makes people feel good. You're giving somebody the opportunity to sound smart. You're giving somebody the opportunity to help.
I think you're right. I think personally, I don't think I've ever had anyone tell me no when I asked them to be my mentor. And I think I've heard so many stories where people are like, yeah, I would love to be your mentor, right? Because to your point, people like helping each other, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. And then the other thing I wanted to ask before we close was networking. And I know you're a big proponent of networking. Obviously, COVID is hindering our networking abilities in person. You mentioned LinkedIn groups before as a great place to network. Any other places for anyone out there listening that might be looking for a new opportunity that you would recommend networking?
Well, first of all, I would challenge anybody to think about what comes up when you hear the word networking. So networking is not asking for a job. It's just an exchange of information. So what I say to somebody is, if you were an investigative reporter or a detective, where would you go to get this information? Who would you talk to? What trail would you follow? And so I think neighbors, friends, relatives, if you say, I'm interested in learning more about X, or I'm thinking about moving into a profession like this, who could I talk to? So really starting by just conversations, friends, family, somebody from your old gym, somebody, classmates. But I have colleagues. I met you through a LinkedIn. Yeah. I've met one of the people in my group from LinkedIn. I just think it's a very targeted way to find communities that speak to you. YouTube, Facebook, all the platforms that you're on as well. So also just Googling professional associations with your area of interest. Definitely going to some kind of, even if they call it a networking event, I just call it I'm going to go find somebody that's the one person I want to talk to event. So
I think that's great advice. I just wanted to make sure I asked that because I think to your point earlier, right? I think you said 80% of jobs are not actually posted, right? So so how are you going to find these jobs? Through networking. So I wanted to make sure we reiterated that point. So, and I said earlier, we could probably talk for like hours.
I'll come back.
Ingrid.
Invite me back. I'll come back.
Well, yeah, we'll have to have you back. But I always close with the same question. So every guest I ask, what is the one piece of advice that you would share with my audience that's helped you reach your full potential? So obviously you've been successful, Ingrid, in a variety of different types of roles, and to your point, multiple careers. At this point in time. What is that one thing that's helped you be so successful that you want to share?
Being willing to push my edges and get out of my comfort zone. So being willing to take chances, do something that's uncomfortable, because I feel like that's where the growth is. So rather than being worried that it'll go poorly or that I'll fail, I'll just do it anyway. And that's what has created a lot of opportunity for me.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for people because we're taught from a very young age that failure is bad, right? And it's not a good thing. And I think from design thinking, failure, and probably from your art, right? Failure just helps you learn. And if you fail, you just try again, right? And as long as you don't, as long as you fail quickly and learn from it, I think it's most of the times it works out. So I think that's great advice. And I think having a career coach or a career therapist, whatever you want to call your profession. I think individuals like yourself help people kind of get there, right? Because sometimes, to your point, it's stuck in your head that you can't do it, and you actually can. And
the process can be very quick. So it's not something like therapy where you're in it for years. It's
good to know.
Yeah. exactly.
So we'll make sure to link to your LinkedIn,
Thank you.
Ingrid, and then in your website so people can get in touch with you. But thank you so much for making time. This is such fantastic advice and so timely with so many people that are currently out of work because of COVID. And I think you're a great example of, your own career has taken so many twists and turns. But to your point, right? Like that's you've learned a lot from that, and you've helped a lot of people because of that. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining me
Thanks
tonight.
for having me, Nick, and bye,
Absolutely.
everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Stay safe and be well.